In early September 1939, British Movietone News informed an anxious nation in cinemas all over the country that Britain was again at war.
The fateful hour of 11 has struck, and Britain's final warning to Hitler having been ignored, a state of war once more exists between Great Britain and Germany.
I was frightened, not knowing quite what to expect, really.
It was quite a traumatic time, but there are many, many instances in war where one feels, well, if your number's up, you get in. We had many, many escapes.
We were all pretty well terrified.
I was terrified.
One of my very close pals in the fire service was killed with possibly the first bomb that fell on West Ham.
During the Second World War, most of these people served in home front occupations. The home front consisted of millions of volunteers who augmented the fire brigades, police, the casualty services, rescue, anti-aircraft, the air raid precaution service, the women's voluntary service and the Home Guard. This is their story. The build-up to a possible world war started as far back as 1935, when the German Führer Adolf Hitler announced that Germany had re-established her military air force, named the Luftwaffe, and introduced military conscription. Both of these acts were in direct contravention of the Versailles Treaty signed after the First War in 1919, which forbade Germany to produce any armaments or to enlarge its small home defense army and navy. In July 1936, a civil war started in Spain with the right-wing Spanish military against the left-wing Republican government. It wasn't long before the fascist governments of Germany and Italy sent in so-called volunteers, guns and aircraft. The Civil War proved an ideal testing ground for Hitler's new Luftwaffe, who helped to blitz the major Spanish cities.
They tried out their planes on Spain, you see, helping the rebels from Franco against the legal government. And Guernica, oh, it was a terrible thing, Guernica, flattened it.
These images on Britain's cinema screens, which were the only visual evidence to the British public, were so real that the civilian population became very concerned that the same thing might easily happen to their street, town or city. The awful spectacle of Spanish civilians forced to hide in hastily built air raid shelters as their cities went up in flames under carpets of German bombs created alarm all over the world. The fear was that what had happened in Spain could also happen in Britain. The British government estimated that 120,000 civilians would be killed in the first week of a future war. Because one of the greatest fears was that poison gas would be dropped from the air.
The war gases were simply horrible. Horrible.
Many ex-servicemen remembered the appalling gas attacks in the trenches during the First War and the terrible legacy it left its victims.
Germany invents air raids, a nightmare legacy for all mankind.
I was given special training in the various war gases, and it was thought at that time that it was very, very likely that the Germans would use poison gas in the early stages.
For this reason, the British government, headed by Neville Chamberlain, instigated the manufacture of gas masks, or respirators, to be distributed to the entire population. Because it was believed that if war was to come, then it would be from the air, as in Spain. In January 1937, his government went one stage further and appealed for volunteers to be air raid wardens. As members of the Air Raid Precaution Service, or ARP, their job in peacetime was to advise the public in recommended air raid precautions. There were rehearsals.
Around the Thames estuary and along the Medway, lights have gone out and the first large-scale rehearsals of air raid precautions are staged in England. Grotesquely clad wardens and ambulance men dash to and fro, giving help and guidance and rescuing mock casualties. When a year ago, British Movietone News, through its editor, urged the necessity of educating the civilian population to operations of this kind, it was like a voice crying in the wilderness. Now it has come to pass. Well, the seriousness being realized, let's see the humor of it. By the light of day, the ambulance helpers practice their craft, but some of the victims have enough life left in them to be awkward. There is anti-air raid training for the army, too.
Brother, Harry, sorry along.
Then forward the rescue party and the fire brigade as smoke begins to pour from one section of Wellington Barracks. Injured guardsmen are carried out on stretchers, and finally an incendiary bomb is located and removed in a general service bucket. Next comes the decontamination squad, hosing the mustard gas into a gully. Amid the grimness of it all, let's have one laugh and admire the realistic acting of a melodramatic sentry.
From the inside. It's all sealed with paper strips.
Because of the threat of gas, Under-Secretary for Home Affairs Geoffrey Lloyd campaigned for people to stay in their homes in the event of war. He viewed a gas-proofed house, which was surrounded by chlorine gas, to see the effects for himself.
Well, sir, did you smell any gas while you were in there?
No, I didn't smell a whiff. And that shows the value of gas-proofing a room. And after all, it can all be done with household accessories costing only a few pence.
How the conflict began is a story imprinted in documents for all time. But here it is in pictures. Remember Munich?
On September the 29th, 1938, Germany, Italy, France and Britain compelled Czechoslovakia to give back Sudetenland to Germany. In return, Chamberlain was convinced that he had achieved peace for Britain.
When he returned with the Anglo-German agreement, it did seem that there was a chance of peace, if Hitler was sincere.
We were disarming, and I think that must have been the reason why our Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, decided on his business of appeasement, because he appreciated that the great strength of the German Army, Navy and Air Force, particularly the Air Force, we'd had a pretty good demonstration of what their German Air Force could do in the Spanish Civil War, with the raids on Spanish cities, with Guernica in particular, that the alarm bells began to ring in this country.
Volunteers are coming forward, equipment is being provided, and Britain is at last awakening to the drastic need for air raid preparedness. Recent events on the continent have made us all think furiously, and we now realize that we are faced with new conditions of warfare. So what Sir Samuel Hoare has to tell us is of particular importance.
I appeal for 1 million men and women to help us with our work. I've had a splendid response. We are going to get our 1 million, but I want all you to come in and give in your names to help us in this great job.